G'day guys, welcome back to True Eagle. It has been a quiet week or so on this channel. Forgive me for a few reasons. One, I was away. Secondly, I was a bit unwell. But thirdly, there's actually not been a lot going on the West Coast Eagles front. We're still obviously, waiting to really embark on our senior coaching thing. I will do a video on that in the coming days. In terms of trade rumours, there's still some teams involved in finals. So negotiations with Hawthorn over Tom Barass and stuff like that, that's probably been put to one side. We haven't delisted a single player yet. And I think this is almost certainly just because I reckon we've just probably got our fingers in a few different pies at the moment with, players out of contract, your Pete Lings, if we're even still a major contender for him, there's Jack Carroll, and potentially a few other smaller deals that we're looking at, and therefore we don't really know how many list spots we need to have open. So that's my sort of understanding as to why we haven't delisted anyone. It probably depends on, who we get in the trade period as much as anything, how many good draft picks we get. For instance, if we don't end up with a Jack Carroll or some sort of mature midfielder option, then perhaps is more likely that we retain someone like Zane True. That's my explanation for why we have done absolutely nothing so far. However, one thing did come across my attention in recent times, and that was this little story about the way we're going to get the deal done for Liam Baker. So as it currently stands, he still hasn't nominated which team he wants to play for. My gut feeling, which should be taken with a grain of salt, of course, is that I think we do end up with Liam Baker here. I've seen it suggested more recently as well that Liam Baker's just waiting to see who the coach is, and that could potentially also influence the decision from Jack Graham. So I don't know if it's a case of if Jack Graham's waiting for Liam Baker to decide they want to go over together. I don't know. But we've also seen an article from the Herald Sun via John Ralph speculating a little bit on how West Coast get this deal done. Now, bear in mind, I think John Ralph is a pretty big Richmond fan. And he I think it was via a tweet initially, he suggested that West Coast would be willing to part ways with pick 3 to get Liam Baker. So to clarify this, I'm certain he wasn't suggesting that it's pick 3 on its own for Liam Baker, because that would be ridiculous. It would be dependent upon Richmond giving up a top 10 selection back. So how are they going to get these top 10 selections? If you look at the current draft order, they only hold pick 1 in the top 10 anyway. However, in the background, Richmond do need to consider deals for Daniel Rioli and Shea Bolton, and that could land them 2 extra top 10 picks. Gold Coast hold pick 6, I think it is currently, and Fremantle enter the draft at pick 9. So if they give up either pick 9 or pick 10, then the flow-on effect is that could be offered back to West Coast in exchange for pick 3. As it currently stands, there's no strong suggestion that West Coast is holding out for Shea Bolton either. He has formally requested Fremantle. It is possible we haven't given up on that. Whether we should or not is another question. But for now, I think we can assume that this is just purely a deal for Liam Baker. So it was subsequently clarified by Mitch Woodcock that Don Pike was asked about pick 3 and Liam Baker, and he ruled out giving pick 3 on its own for Liam Baker. And my God, if we gave up pick 3 on its own for Liam Baker, I would probably take a break from football. However, Woodcock did report in the West Australian that Pike did not rule out parting with pick 3 and securing a top 10 pick from Richmond for Liam Baker. So we'll go through, the pros and cons of all these different things. Bearing in mind as well, Don Pike, while he is the CEO, I don't know how involved he is going to be with these trade negotiations. He doesn't ultimately have final say. There's a whole team and a list manager in charge of that, but I'd imagine he probably has a good idea. So as it currently stands, there are 2 possibilities for us getting a top 10 pick back from Richmond if we were to do this deal. We will go into what I actually think about it, but let's go through the scenarios. So hypothetically, we could trade pick 3 in exchange for Liam Baker and pick 6. That's if, Gold Coast offer up pick 6 for Dan Rioli. If Richmond agreed to that, according to a draft pick points calculator, that would value Liam Baker at about pick 37. So I can understand why Richmond wouldn't do that, and you shouldn't just go off, pick values for a start. All drafts are a little bit different, but as a rough guide, valuing Liam Baker for pick 37 is probably unders, and I'd be surprised if Richmond agreed to that. Nonetheless, it's still a better outcome for us, right? So the other alternative is, say Fremantle give up pick 9 for Shea Bolton. We could trade pick 3 for Liam Baker and pick 9 in this year's draft, and that values Liam Baker at about pick 25, which is closer to the mark. So obviously that's a greater downgrade from 3. It's dropping all the way to entering the draft at pick 9. But on points, it is a fairer deal for Liam Baker. So how do we feel about that? My initial reaction is that I'm not completely sold on dropping that far down the draft order to enter the draft at pick 9. We did this in 2022 and I think it worked okay because there were extenuating circumstances. So to be specific, we traded down from pick 2 to get picks, what became 9 and 14. It was originally 8 and 12. We got Ginby and Hewitt, and I think that was a reasonable outcome considering Harry Sheezel was unwilling to leave Victoria. At least that was the prevailing rumour. So West Coast made the decision to slide back. So this hypothetically would be a similar sort of outcome. So that's my first reaction, not wanting to trade down that too far, but I will expand on that in a little bit. We do need to consider opportunity cost, okay? What does trading down 3 to 9 actually provide us? What it does is allow us to hold pick 23 because that would otherwise presumably form a central part of our trade for Liam Baker. In an ideal world, we could offer pick 23 for Liam Baker and Richmond would snap it up and we would still take a selection at 3. So to simplify this, these are the 3 options that I think we are faced with at this current point in time. So we could not trade at all for Liam Baker and hold picks 3 and 23 in this year's draft. Option B is to trade pick 23 and then hold pick 3 and Liam Baker and no second round selection or third round selection. This, of course, depends on what we get for Tom Barass, but we'll just park that for a minute. We'd have pick 3 and Liam Baker, and our next nominal pick would be 59, although presumably we get Hawthorn's first round pick as well. So that's option 2. However, if we did this deal for Liam Baker where we trade pick 3 and get back pick 9, we would hold picks 9, 23 and Liam Baker. So we do need to consider that as part of the opportunity cost, if you like, is that it does allow us to hold an extra top 25 selection. So just getting back to the Tom Barass deal, that is also going to be important as to how satisfied we are with our eventual draft hand here, right? So on Tom Barass, I think what we need to consider here is that Hawthorn won a final now, and I think are favourites to beat Port Adelaide this weekend at Adelaide Oval. What's the effect of that? Well, they started this final series with pick 12. That was what we originally were going to get as the central part of a trade for Tom Barass. The effect of them winning their first final means that will probably end up being 13 or 14. If they beat Port Adelaide this weekend, that becomes 15 or 16. Presumably, it will end up being pick 15. So it's shuffle back 3 picks if the expected result goes their way this weekend. If Hawthorn beat Port Adelaide, their first round selection is pick 15. This essentially means our offer for Tom Barass has gotten weaker, but it could work out because it could force some sort of pressure for us to potentially push for an extra first round pick next year. Now, an outcome that I would actually be fairly comfortable with here is if Hawthorn offer us pick 15, right, for Tom Barass. If we can push to get their first rounder next year as well, but we give our future second round pick in exchange, I actually think that is a compromise I'd be willing to accept. If we can get another top 15 pick this year and they upgrade our pick next year to their first round pick. So if Hawthorn and West Coast finish in the exact same spots, which is unlikely, the exact same spots next year, they would essentially be upgrading our 23 next year to pick 15. If the absolute worst case scenario happens and Hawthorn win the premiership and West Coast win the wooden spoon next year, which is not likely, but yeah, possible, you'd think presumably that's only upgrading pick 19 to pick 18. There's a couple of extra factors to bear in mind here though. In between the first round and the second round is where the AFL tend to lodge their priority picks, if there's going to be any priority picks issued next year, but also band 2 compensation picks for any free agents. So that could happen this year as well. If say Josh Battle, even if he's band 1 or band 2, that's going to push our second round selection back further. So the effect of switching our second round pick next year to Hawthorn's first round pick is that we get ahead of a whole stack of potential free agency deals. Now it's hard to, project this far out how many picks that's actually going to be. But I think last year there was a whole stack of band 2 compensation picks. As you know, we entered the second round at pick 30. So I don't think that's insignificant. If it's pick 15 and next year upgrading pick 23 to pick 15 as well, and we get 2 first round selections next year, that is an outcome I would probably be fairly comfortable with. So to summarize that, this is what we could potentially hold if we do a trade with Richmond for pick 3 and pick 9 and Liam Baker, and we make that deal work with Hawthorn. We would hold picks 9, 13, 23, and 59 and 77 in this year's draft, plus Liam Baker, potentially Jack Graham, and who else. We would also hold 2 first-round selections next year and no second-round selection. And sorry to clarify, I've left it as pick 13 because Hawthorn haven't won yet, but that 13 could become pick 15. If we simply trade pick 23 for Liam Baker, that leaves our hand at 3, 13, 59, and 77. Or if we just entirely forego Liam Baker, we go 3, 13, 23, 59s at 77. So that's, the different options that we potentially have this trade period, at least based on what's reported. Obviously, a lot can play out between now and the end of trade period. So now let's really consider whether or not we're willing to go from pick 3 to pick 9 simply to keep pick 23 in this year's draft. Now, for some draft context, I think this draft is quite even in the top 25 and even the top 40. A lot of those selections are better than they have been in previous years. I've heard someone suggest that a pick in the 40s might be worth a pick in the 20s in last year's draft, such as the evenness. So perhaps there is some merit to keeping a pick inside the top 25 for the sake of picking at pick 9 instead of pick 3. Now, I'm not completely convinced that it's a good idea. Don't get me wrong. I'm just sort of weighing up the benefits. What is the opportunity cost of entering the draft at pick 9 instead of pick 3? We need to consider that there is almost certainly going to be some top prospects in this year's draft who are unwilling to come to Western Australia and stay there. In other words, they're a flight risk. Now, there was a lot of rumour about Harley Reid last year, but a lot of that was unfounded in my opinion. It really came from one source, and that was Sam McClure. And, however, these do pop up every year. I mean, it was said about Chad Wingard back in the day. It was said about Bailey Smith. It was said about Ben Hobbs. It was said about Harry Sheezel, and it was said about George Wardlaw. To some extent, all of these players slid a little bit later than you'd expect and were taken by clubs in their home state. This year, again, I don't want to perpetuate a myth, but I have heard some speculation that guys like Josh Smiley, Finn O'Sullivan to some extent, although don't quote me on that one, Murphy Reid, and Taj Houghton, all of these top dozen selections are considered flight risks. So I will defer to West Coast judgment. I sense that they knew that they weren't going to keep a Harry Sheezel, and that's why we traded down. I will defer to West Coast judgment on that, but just adding some context to the situation here. However, there are still some good prospects that are potentially available at pick 3. So in my opinion, even if you look at it as pessimistically as possible and eliminate some of those options that might be flight risks as such, there's still a Sam Lawler who's from Vic Country, and there's no suggestion he would be a flight risk. Sid Draper is another player that's growing on me, and Harvey Langford is another one from Vic Country that, is potentially going to go at the pointy end of the draft as well. So even if you just limit it to those prospects, there is a cost to not having access to those top guys. So if we enter the draft at, say, pick 3 instead of pick 9, well, then you're looking more around names like Toby Travalia could be there, and he looks like a good prospect. Same thing with young West Australian Bo Allen. And then there's also Xavier Lindsay, a player that I do think suits our needs quite a lot. You could even go Joe Berry, but I don't know if we would really, take a first-round pick on a small forward at this point. I could be wrong. And look, there isn't that much of a talent deficit between Lawler, Draper, Langford, and Travalia, Allen, and Lindsay, considering we would also get the extra top 25 pick for picking in that second group. However, my biggest concern is I really think we need to hit the midfield with this selection, and I am a little bit uneasy about seeing us pick a guy who has the potential to become a midfielder eventually. Your Lawlers, your Drapers, and Langfords, I don't think there's any real doubt that these guys are midfielders and will be midfielders at the next level. When you consider in recent times, a couple of guys we spent first round draft picks on as midfielders in Ruben Ginbey and to some extent Campbell Chesser, both of these guys ended the year as defenders. Like Campbell Chesser played off the halfback flank, if I'm not mistaken, in that final round. And of course, in terms of his likelihood to make it, the jury's still out, naturally. I'm hopeful he makes it. I haven't written him off by any stretch, but suddenly I think there is still a midfield need, absolutely, with Ginbey probably looking more and more like a defender as time goes on. So if we're looking at guys like Travalia, who is a running defender, wingman, who could potentially be a midfielder, even Bo Allen, I know he was a midfielder in the championships, but so was Ginbey. Ginbey was WA's MVP as a genuine midfielder in that draft, and as far as I'm concerned, as a AFL level midfielder, probably is a much better defender. So I don't really want to fall into that same trap. Xavier Lindsay probably is the most pure midfielder out of those. I know he spent a little bit of time off halfback, but probably lacks the upside of a Lawler, a Draper, a Langford. So there's that to consider, and I think we would be ridding ourselves of the opportunity to pick a genuine midfielder in this year's draft. On the other hand, the top 25 does look good, so we're really allowing ourselves another selection and potentially, add. There's a really good pack of like talls at the moment, and the draft order will shuffle, but I'm hoping we pick up, a good key position defender in the top 25 of this year's draft. There is a number of options. So in summary, those are the options that we're presented with, based on the speculation and based on the reporting that we have. And still, I'm a little bit ambivalent, a little conflicted, to be honest, but those are my general thoughts. So by all means, let me know what you think. Again, there's a part of me that will defer to the Eagles here and their recruiters and assess, are these guys flight risks? Are we really picking from the same talent pool as other clubs? That is a genuine consideration here that we really aren't privy to. And perhaps they think retaining pick 23 and taking another guy in the top 25, the benefit of that may exceed the deficit between pick 3 and pick 9. Like I said, conflicted. But as always, let me know in the comments what you think, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.